The apartment smelled like instant noodles and resignation. Saitama lay on his back staring at the ceiling, with the blank expression of a man who had run out of reasons to blink. The television flickered in the corner, a news anchor's voice cutting through the stale air with practiced urgency. Disaster-level tigers spotted in the shopping district. Heroes are advised to... He didn't move. On the low table beside him sat a crumpled flyer, its red letters screaming about discounts that expired in 43 minutes. That was the only thing that had made his eye twitch all morning. Not the monster, not the screaming, the sale. Saitama had been strong for so long that strength had stopped meaning anything. Enemies fell before he could remember their names. Threats dissolved before he could decide whether to care. Somewhere along the way, the thrill had drained out, leaving only the mechanical motions of heroism and the very real concern of whether he could afford eggs this week. He sat up, stood, walked to the door. The flyer fluttered to the floor. Outside, the city was screaming. The monsters stood 3 stories tall, all teeth and scales, and theatrical roaring. People scattered like startled birds, their panic choreographed by the same survival instinct that had played out 1,000 times before. Saitama walked through the chaos the way someone might cross a busy intersection. Not rushing, not afraid, just moving. The creature turned toward him, eyes burning with whatever passed for fury and something born from violence and bad special effects. It opened its mouth. Saitama raised one fist, one punch. The monster exploded backward in a spray of physics-defying force, its body crumpling against a building like wet paper. Silence rushed in to fill the space where violence had been. Somewhere a car alarm started beeping. Saitama looked at his watch. 26 minutes until the sale ended. No celebration. No fist pump. No dramatic one-liner for the cameras that would arrive too late anyway. Just a man in a yellow suit and a red cape standing in the wreckage of something that should have mattered more than it did. He turned to leave. That was when the air began to tear. It started small. A whisper of wrongness, like fabric catching on a nail. Saitama stopped, head tilting slightly as reality developed a seam. The sound was quiet at first, then louder, a ripping, tearing noise that didn't belong to wind or machinery or anything he'd heard before. A crack opened in the space 3 feet to his left. Not an explosion. Not a portal in the dramatic glowing sense. Just a wound in the world edges flickering like a film reel, burning frame by frame. Saitama stared at it the way he might look at a vending machine that had eaten his money, mildly annoyed, vaguely curious, mostly just inconvenienced. "What now?" he said. Not a question. Just words falling into the space between him and the unraveling air. The rift widened. Darkness spilled out thick and cold, pulling at him with the insistence of gravity discovering a new direction. He felt his feet leave the ground, not violently, not with any particular drama, just up and then away, like being yanked off stage by a hook he couldn't see. For a moment, Saitama hung in the air, suspended between one reality and whatever waited on the other side. His expression didn't change. His pulse didn't quicken. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small, tired part of him wondered if this would at least be interesting. Then the rift swallowed him whole. The world folded in on itself, sound-light sensation, all compressing into a single point of nothingness. There was no tunnel, no cosmic highway, just absence stretching in all directions at once, until even absence became too much work to maintain. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, it stopped. Saitama landed on cold stone. Not crashed, not slammed. Just landed, knees bent slightly, cape settling around his shoulders like it had all the time in the world. He straightened slowly, taking in his surroundings with the expression of someone who had just missed his bus. The room was dark, enormous. The kind of dark that suggested intention rather than absence of light. Tall shelves stretched upward into shadow, each one lined with objects that gleamed dully in the dim blue glow of flames that burned without heat. The air tasted like dust and secrecy. Somewhere in the distance, footsteps echoed. Fast, multiple, urgent. Saitama looked down at himself, yellow suit, red cape, the same bald head that had stared back at him from the bathroom mirror that morning. Nothing had changed. He was exactly who he'd been 3 minutes ago, standing in a destroyed shopping district, worried about groceries. The footsteps grew louder. Great. Saitama muttered, his voice flat in the cavernous space. This again. He didn't know where he was. Didn't know how he'd gotten there, or why, or what cosmic joke had decided to interrupt his afternoon. What he did know was that the sale was definitely over by now, and someone was about to try very hard to make this his problem. The first spell hit him square in the chest before he'd finished the thought. End of Act 0. Word count 950 words. The spell felt like being hit with a warm towel. Uncomfortable. Mildly irritating. Completely ineffective. Saitama stood in the same spot, looking down at his chest, where a rope of red light had wrapped itself around his torso. The glow pulsed weakly, trying very hard to constrict. It managed to tighten about as much as a loose scarf. He looked up. 3 figures had emerged from the shadows between the towering shelves. Wands, raised faces sharp with the kind of focus that came from years of training and zero experience with invulnerable bald men in capes. They wore dark robes that seemed to absorb the blue firelight. Official. Dangerous. Completely unprepared for what they were looking at. Don't move. The lead Auror said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed immediately. Saitama didn't move. Not because of the command, but because he was still trying to figure out what the glowing rope was supposed to be doing. It tingled. That was about it. Identify yourself, the second Auror demanded, wand steady. Her eyes flicked between Saitama's face and his cape, looking for context that refused to arrive. How did you breach Ministry security? What division sent you? I didn't breach anything, Saitama said. His voice was flat, patient, in the way of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should already know it. I was buying groceries. Then I wasn't. The Aurors exchanged glances. This was not the response their training had prepared them for. Sir, you are currently standing in the Department of Mysteries without authorization, clearance, or explanation. The lead Auror's wand didn't waver. The binding hex should have rendered you immobile. The fact that you're still standing means you're either very skilled or very stupid. Saitama looked down at the glowing rope again. Is this supposed to hurt? That was when the third Auror cast the stunning spell. The bolt of red light hit Saitama in the face, with all the force of Ministry-approved incapacitation magic. His head snapped back exactly 1 degree. His expression didn't change. The spell dissipated against his skin like mist hitting a window. Silence descended on the Department of Mysteries like a curtain dropping on a stage where all the actors had forgotten their lines. Oh, the third Auror said quietly. Oh, no. The lead Auror's jaw tightened. Years of protocol clicked into place, each procedure designed for threats they understood. Rogue wizards, dark artifacts, creatures that followed rules written in blood and binding magic. Not this. not whatever this was. "Reinforcements," he said, his voice clipped. "Now." More wands emerged from the darkness, more auras drawn by alarms that had been screaming since the moment Saitama's feet touched stone. They formed a loose circle, 12 deep, every wand trained on the man in yellow, who stood at the center like a piece of furniture that had wandered into the wrong room. Saitama sighed. "Look, I don't want trouble. I just want to know where I am and how to get back." "Surrender your wand," an aura called from the perimeter. "Don't have one." "Then how?" "I don't know." Saitama's tone carried the weight of a man who had stopped asking how things worked a long time ago. "Things happen. I deal with them. That's it." The auras didn't lower their wands, but something shifted in the air. Confusion warring with procedure. Fear dancing with bureaucratic certainty. Someone was going to make a decision soon, and Saitama had the distinct feeling it wasn't going to involve helpful directions and an apology for the inconvenience. Behind the ring of auras, footsteps approached. Different. Heavier. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who made decisions for other people. The circle parted. The man who stepped through wore robes that looked expensive in a way that suggested he'd never had to think about money. His face was carefully neutral eyes, sharp behind thin spectacles. He studied Saitama the way a scientist might study a specimen that had just violated 3 laws of nature and was showing no signs of remorse. "Detain him," the official said. Not to Saitama. To the auras, to the room, to the weight of authority that followed men like him wherever they went. Department of Mysteries breach protocol, maximum security, no communication until we understand what we're dealing with. "I'm dealing with missing a sale," Saitama said. "That's what I'm dealing with." The official's expression didn't change. "Take him to holding. Quietly. If the prophet gets wind of this before we have answers, it becomes everyone's problem." The auras moved in wands, glowing with spells designed to transport to bind, to ensure compliance. They hit Saitama from 6 different angles. Levitation charms, freezing hexes, the full weight of magical restraint condensed into coordinated action. Saitama felt himself lift slightly off the ground. The sensation was weird, like standing on a floor that someone was slowly inflating. He didn't fight it. Fighting seemed like more work than it was worth, and honestly, maybe these people knew where the exit was. "Cooperation noted," the official said, making a mark on a clipboard that had materialized from his robes. "Auror Dawlish, see that our guest is comfortable. We'll begin interviews within the hour." They moved him through corridors that twisted in ways architecture shouldn't allow, past doors that hummed with wards and warnings deeper into a building that felt less like a government office and more like a vault designed to keep secrets from escaping. The blue flames gave way to harsh electric light. The mystery gave way to bureaucracy. The holding cell was small, clean, depressingly boring. 4 walls, 1 bench, and a door that looked like it had been designed to contain things considerably more dangerous than a man who just wanted to go home. Saitama sat on the bench. The enchantments keeping him in place faded, their job done. He looked around the cell with the interest of someone cataloging paint colors. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time had a way of losing meaning when you were bored enough. The door opened. The man who entered didn't look like the others. Older. Tired in a way that went deeper than missed sleep. Robes that had seen better days. Eyes that had seen considerably worse. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need titles to command a room. "Saitama," he said. Not a question. Just a name offered like a handshake. Yeah. My name is Albus Dumbledore. I'm headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He sat on the bench opposite, moving with the careful deliberation of age. I understand you've had quite the afternoon. Saitama shrugged. I've had weirder. I imagine you have. Dumbledore's eyes, bright blue, almost cheerful despite everything, studied him with open curiosity. The Ministry is quite perplexed. You appear to be a muggle, yet you survived spells that should have incapacitated you instantly. You arrived in one of the most secure locations in magical Britain without triggering any alarms until you were already inside. And you seem remarkably unconcerned about all of it. Concern doesn't really help? No, Dumbledore agreed. I suppose it doesn't. He leaned back slightly, hands folded in his lap. The Ministry wants to hold you indefinitely. Study you. Determine whether you're a threat or a resource. Possibly both. They're quite good at making people disappear when those people don't fit into neat categories. And you? I think, Dumbledore said slowly, that you are something altogether different. Something that frightens them precisely because they cannot define it. And frightened bureaucrats tend to make decisions they later regret. Saitama waited. I have an arrangement with the Ministry, Dumbledore continued. A school for young witches and wizards, isolated and secure. If you were to stay there temporarily, as a guest rather than a prisoner, it would satisfy their need for control while giving us time to understand how you might return to wherever you came from. Your school have food. For the first time, something like amusement flickered across Dumbledore's face. It does. 3 meals a day. Quite good, actually, if you don't mind the occasional experimental dish from the house elves. Saitama considered this. Prison or school, experiments or meals. The math wasn't complicated. Okay. Excellent. Dumbledore stood, bones creaking slightly. I should warn you the school is currently experiencing some tension. Political interference, adolescent drama, the usual difficulties of education during uncertain times. May not be the peaceful refuge you're hoping for. I'll manage. Dumbledore smiled, and for a moment something ancient and knowing looked out from behind those bright eyes. Yes, he said quietly. I rather think you will. The door opened again. Different oars this time, carrying papers that transferred custody from the Ministry to Hogwarts School. Official stamps, signatures, the slow grinding machinery of magical bureaucracy processing an anomaly it couldn't quite categorize. Saitama stood, followed. Didn't look back at the cell or the Ministry, or the officials still arguing in rooms he couldn't see about what he meant and what he was and what should be done about it. He had survived the end of the world before. He could survive a school. Probably. End of Act 1. Word count 1, 450 words. Hogwarts appeared through the carriage window like something out of a storybook written by someone who'd never learned to stop. Towers climbed toward the sky with aggressive whimsy. Turrets sprouted from turrets. The whole structure defied gravity and good sense in equal measure, perched on a cliff above a lake that reflected starlight like scattered glass. Saitama looked at it, looked away, looked back to confirm it was still there. Impressive, isn't it? Dumbledore said from across the carriage, which had arrived without horses and traveled without explanation. It's big. Nearly 1,000 years of magical architecture will do that. The headmaster's eyes twinkled in the darkness. Try not to get lost. The staircases move, the portraits talk, and the castle has a rather mischievous sense of direction. Great. They passed through gates that opened on their own down paths lined with students who stopped mid-conversation to stare. Whispers followed in their wake, spreading like ripples across water. By the time they reached the entrance hall, half the school probably knew something unusual had arrived. The great hall stretched longer than seemed reasonable, 4 house tables running its length beneath floating candles that dripped no wax. The ceiling showed night sky stars, wheeling slowly in a darkness that was either enchanted or structurally questionable. Students filled the benches, their chatter dying in uneven waves as Saitama walked past. A woman in emerald robes intercepted them near the staff table, her expression tight with controlled displeasure. Albus, a word. Professor McGonagall, may I introduce our temporary guest, Saitama? McGonagall's eyes swept over him, yellow suit, red cape, completely bald head. Her lips compressed into a line that could have cut stone. The ministry authorized this. The ministry insisted on it, actually, far more enthusiastically than they'll admit in official reports. Dumbledore gestured toward the staff table. He'll be staying with us until we determine how to return him to his proper place. I trust you'll help him feel welcome. Welcome. McGonagall made the word sound like a diagnosis. Very well. I assume he'll need quarters? And perhaps a tour. The castle can be disorienting for first-time visitors. It's disorienting for people who've lived here 20 years. But she nodded sharp and precise. I'll arrange something. Saitama found himself installed in a room that seemed designed to prove magic had too much free time. The furniture rearranged itself when he wasn't looking. The mirror offered unsolicited compliments. A portrait of a sleeping knight snored in the corner, somehow managing to be loud while painted. He sat on the bed, stared at the wall. The wall stared back because, in Hogwarts, even architectural features had opinions. Sleep came eventually, dragging him under without ceremony. Morning arrived with identical enthusiasm. The castle woke in layers, portraits, gossiping ghosts drifting through walls, students stumbling toward breakfast with the coordination of newborn deer. Saitama followed the noise, navigating stairs that absolutely had moved since last night, until he found the great hall again. Food appeared on the tables with the same casual disregard for physics that governed everything else here. Eggs materialized. Toast stacked itself. Pitchers filled from nothing. Saitama sat at the edge of Gryffindor table. McGonagall had been very specific about house assignments, not applying to guests, and started eating. The staring began immediately. Is that him? A girl with bushy brown hair whispered to the boy beside her, loudly enough to qualify as stage direction. Must be, the redhead replied, equally subtle. Hermione, you're doing the thing where you stare and pretend you're not staring. I'm not pretending anything, Ron. I'm observing. There's a difference. A dark-haired boy with glasses leaned forward, curiosity overriding caution. Excuse me, are you really the person who survived the ministry's holding cells? Saitama swallowed a piece of toast. I didn't survive them. I just sat there. Then I left. But the rumors said, Harry, don't interrogate him during breakfast. Hermione's tone carried the authority of someone used to managing chaos. But her eyes never left Saitama, cataloging details with uncomfortable precision. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Saitama existed. The castle reacted. Students whispered. Teachers watched. Nothing quite resolved into anything resembling normal. But nothing exploded either, which by Hogwarts standards counted as success. The school felt wrong in ways that had nothing to do with moving staircases or talking portraits. The wrongness was subtler, more deliberate. It lived in the way students glanced over their shoulders during class, in the carefully blank expressions when certain topics arose, in the thick tension that clung to conversations like humidity before a storm. Dumbledore had mentioned political interference. He'd undersold it. A woman arrived during Saitama's third day, entering the Great Hall, with the confidence of someone who owned the deed to everything she looked at. Pink cardigan, pink bow, smile sharp enough to fillet fish. She radiated authority in the specific way that suggested she had never earned it, but absolutely intended to keep it. Dolores Umbridge, Hermione muttered darkly, watching the woman settle at the staff table. Undersecretary to the minister. She's here to evaluate educational standards. Which means, Saitama asked, which means make everyone miserable and call it improvement. The evaluation started with new rules, posted in the corridors, announced at meals. Educational Decree number 24 through 39, each one carefully designed to make learning harder while claiming to make it safer. No student groups without ministry approval. No unapproved materials. Defense against the dark arts would focus on theory-only practical magic deemed unnecessary and potentially dangerous. The students simmered with frustration that had nowhere to go except inward. Saitama watched it happen the way someone might watch weather rolling in. Not his storm, not his school. But increasingly hard to ignore when the tension started bleeding into everything. They're not even teaching us to defend ourselves, Harry said one evening in the corridor, voice tight with anger barely contained. Umbridge's class is useless, just reading. No wands, no practice, nothing that would actually help if... He stopped, bit down on whatever he'd been about to say. Hermione and Ron exchanged looks that communicated entire conversations without words. If what? Saitama asked. Nothing, Harry said quickly. Just frustrated. But it wasn't nothing. The school knew it. The whispered conversations knew it. The way students flinched at sudden noises knew it. Something dark pressed against the edges of Hogwarts, and everyone was pretending very hard not to notice. 3 weeks into Saitama's stay, he found himself in an empty classroom at midnight because sleep had stopped seeming worth the effort. The room was dusty, filled with broken furniture and decades of accumulated neglect. He sat on a desk that didn't collapse, staring at shadows that probably weren't alive. The door opened. Harry, Hermione, Ron, and a dozen other students filed in, wands-drawn expressions oscillating between determination and terror. They stopped when they saw him. "Oh," Harry said. "Sorry. We thought this room was... empty," Hermione finished. Her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here? Sitting. At midnight." "Time doesn't stop being midnight just because I go to bed." Ron snorted quickly, disguising it as a cough when Hermione glared at him. "We're practicing," Harry said after a moment, making a decision Saitama could almost see forming behind his eyes. "Defense spells, actual defense, since we're not learning anything useful in class." "Illegal defense spells," a nervous-looking boy added. "Very illegal. If Umbridge finds out..." "She won't," Hermione said firmly. "Not if we're careful." They spread out, forming loose pairs. Wands rose. Spells flew, shield stunners, disarming charms that sent wands spinning across the room. The magic was clumsy, but determined, each student pushing against the fear that came with breaking rules that existed specifically to keep them afraid. Saitama watched. Said nothing. This wasn't his fight. "You could help," Harry said, suddenly lowering his wand. You survived ministry hexes. You must know something about defense. I don't know magic. You don't need to. Harry's voice carried an edge that sounded older than 16. You know how to stay calm when everything's trying to hurt you. That's more than half of it. The room went quiet. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward Saitama, waiting. He sighed. Fine. But I'm not teaching spells. Then what? Calm, distance, training. Saitama stood, moving to the center of the room. Most of you are panicking before the spell even hits. You're thinking about getting hurt instead of thinking about not getting hurt. Different thing. How is that different? Ron asked. One freezes you, one moves you. Saitama looked at them, these kids playing at war, because war had started playing at them first. You can't dodge everything, but you can dodge more than you think if you're not busy being scared. That's not very specific, Hermione said, notebook already out. Okay, run. What? Run, all of you, around the room, now. They ran. Confused, awkward, but they ran. Saitama watched their breathing, their posture, the way panic made them clumsy. Faster. Like something's chasing you. Something is chasing us, a girl gasped. Umbridge, the ministry, take your pick. Then run like you believe it. They did. And slowly, very slowly, the fear started looking less like paralysis and more like fuel. Now duck. They dropped, scattered, ungraceful, but immediate. Good. That's it. That's the reflex you need. Fast. No thinking. Just move. The training became routine. 3 times a week, midnight, the same dusty classroom. Saitama didn't teach them to fight. He taught them to breathe when their lungs wanted to freeze, to stay balanced when hexes flew past their heads, to remember that survival wasn't about being the strongest, it was about being the last one standing when the strong had exhausted themselves. And he taught them the exercise, the one that sounded like a joke until you tried it. 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, 10-kilometer run, every day. The laughter died when they realized he was serious. That's not magic, Hermione protested. No, it's worse. It's boring. Saitama's expression didn't change. Magic makes you strong fast. This makes you strong slow, but slow strength doesn't disappear when someone takes your wand. They grumbled, complained. Did it anyway, because desperation had a way of making stupid ideas look reasonable. Ron quit after 3 days, came back after 4. My legs hate you, he announced. They'll get over it. Will they though? Probably not. But something was changing. The students moved differently, stood differently. The fear was still there. Fear didn't disappear just because you could do a push-up, but it had company now. Resilience. Stubbornness. The angry determination of people who decided to stop being helpless. Umbridge noticed. I've heard, she said during one particularly unpleasant dinner, her voice carrying across the great hall with deliberate precision, that certain students have been engaging in unauthorized physical training. How curious. One might wonder what they're preparing for. Her smile could have stripped paint. Dumbledore's eyes flickered toward Saitama for just a moment. A warning, a question, an acknowledgement that things were moving in directions that couldn't be controlled much longer. That night, the first incident happened. A student woke screaming, drenched in sweat, clawing at shadows that weren't there. By morning, 3 more had collapsed during breakfast, shaking and pale, describing cold that went beyond temperature into something existential. Something that drained light and hope and left only the worst version of emptiness. The castle's fear, which had been abstract and political, suddenly became concrete. "Dementors?" Hermione whispered, though none had been seen. "Or something like them. Something that feeds on happiness." The affected students recovered slowly, left hollow in ways that lingered. Whatever had touched them hadn't been looking for bodies. It had been looking for souls. Harry found Saitama in the corridor that afternoon, expression dark. "We need to do something." "Like what?" "I don't know. But people are getting hurt. And it's only going to get worse." His hands clenched into fists. "There are things happening outside these walls. Dark things. And Umbridge is making sure we're completely unprepared when they finally break through." "You think they will?" "I know they will." Harry's voice dropped. "I've seen it. In dreams, in visions. Something's coming, and it wants something from the Ministry. From the Department of Mysteries." Saitama remembered the department. The shelves. The strange blue flames. The room where he'd arrived, filled with objects that seemed to exist specifically to keep secrets. "What's in the Department of Mysteries?" "I don't know exactly. But it's important enough that he's willing to risk everything to get it." Harry's jaw tightened. For a moment he looked like he was deciding whether to say a name that shouldn't be spoken. Then he did anyway, voice barely above a whisper. "Voldemort." The name fell between them like a stone into still water. "Everyone's afraid of him," Harry continued. "The Ministry denies he's back. Umbridge calls it lies. But he is back. I've seen him, fought him, and he's planning something. And you want to stop him. I want to know what he's after. Then stop him, in that order." Harry looked up, green eyes bright with desperation and determination tangled together. "Will you help?" Saitama had heard versions of this question before. Different worlds, different stakes. Always the same core plea: help us fight the thing we can't fight alone. He'd learned to say no. Learned that inserting himself into other people's wars usually made things worse. Learned that being strong didn't mean being responsible for fixing everything broken. But the look in Harry's eyes reminded him of something he'd almost forgotten. The reason he'd started being a hero in the first place, back when it still mattered. Not because he was strong, because it seemed like the right thing to do. "If it gets that bad," Saitama said carefully, "I'll help. But you're not rushing into anything stupid. Define stupid. Anything that gets you killed when you could have waited 5 minutes to not get killed." Harry almost smiled. "Deal." 2 nights later, Harry woke the entire dormitory with a scream that suggested he'd just watched someone die. When the others found him, he was white-faced, trembling, insisting they had to go. Had to leave. Had to get to the Ministry right now, because someone was being tortured, and they were the only ones who could stop it. Hermione tried reason. Ron tried distraction. Neither worked. By the time they found Saitama, Harry had already gathered 6 students and convinced them that rushing into the Department of Mysteries at night was somehow less dangerous than doing nothing. "It's a trap," Saitama said flatly. "It might be. But if it's not, then you're running toward exactly what you said you wanted to know about." Saitama looked at the assembled students, young, terrified, absolutely determined to do something phenomenally dangerous. "Fine, I'll come. But when this goes wrong, don't say I didn't warn you." "It won't go wrong," Harry said. "It always goes wrong." They left Hogwarts in the dead of night, sneaking past enchantments and teachers and common sense. The journey to London involved fire powder and transportation methods that made even less sense than the carriage. The ministry building rose from the city like a monument to bureaucratic confidence, all marble and authority, and the absolute certainty that it knew better than everyone else. Inside the Department of Mysteries waited, exactly where this had started, exactly where it was about to get much, much worse. End of Act 2. Word count 2, 850 words. The Department of Mysteries at night felt different than it had during Saitama's arrival. Emptier, colder. The blue flames still burned in their brackets, but their light seemed thinner now, as if the darkness had learned to push back. Harry led them through the entrance hall, past the fountain where golden statues proclaimed the superiority of wizard kind with uncomfortable enthusiasm. The lift descended in silence, broken only by breathing and the mechanical grinding of ancient machinery. Nobody spoke. Speaking would have required acknowledging what they were doing, and acknowledging it might give someone time to realize how monumentally stupid this was. The 9th level arrived with a quiet ding that sounded obscene in the tension. The corridor stretched before them, black doors lining both sides, each one identical and unmarked. Harry walked forward with the certainty of someone following a map written in nightmares. 3rd door on the left. His hand touched the handle. The door swung open onto chaos masquerading as order. The room beyond defied reasonable dimensions. Doors lined every wall, 12 in total, each leading to chambers that studied things magic couldn't explain, but insisted on cataloging anyway. Time, death, love, thought. The Department of Mysteries existed to prove that some questions didn't have answers, only increasingly elaborate ways of avoiding them. This way, Harry breathed, moving toward a door that looked like all the others, but apparently wasn't. They followed him through rooms that shifted between profound and absurd. A chamber where clocks melted into puddles of liquid time. Another filled with a single stone archway, tattered curtain hanging from its frame, whispering in voices that promised answers to questions nobody should ask. Saitama felt something watching from behind that curtain. Something patient. Something that knew his name without needing to be told. He kept walking. The Hall of Prophecy opened before them, like a cathedral built by pessimists. The ceiling vanished into darkness so complete it might have been absence rather than shadow. Rows upon rows of shelves climbed upward, each one sagging under the weight of thousands of glass spheres. The orbs glowed faintly from within, dusty and forgotten, each one containing a future that might have been, or might still be, or might never matter at all. Blue candles burned at the end of each row, their flames frozen in the act of flickering. The light they cast was wrong, too cold, too blue, highlighting edges while drowning depth in shadow. The far end of the hall disappeared into blackness that felt intentional. Harry moved between the shelves, reading labels yellowed with age. It should be here. Row 97. Harry. Hermione's voice was tight. This feels wrong. Everything feels wrong. That doesn't make it not real. They found the shelf, found the sphere. Harry reached for it with hands that shook just enough to matter. The orb came free with a sound like a sigh. Pale light swirled inside words, forming and dissolving in patterns that suggested meaning without committing to it. Got it, Harry said. Relief and dread fought for control of his expression. Relief won briefly. Then the laughter started. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off shelves and ceiling, and the fundamental wrongness of the space itself. Slow, mocking. The sound of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment and was savoring it. Figures emerged from the shadows between the rows, robes so black they seemed to absorb light, masks that turned faces into blanks, personality erased in favor of uniform menace. They moved with the coordination of people who'd practiced this, who'd planned this, who knew exactly how terrified their targets would be. Death Eaters. A dozen at least, possibly more, lurking in the darkness beyond the candle's reach. "Look at them," one said, voice distorted by the mask into something inhuman. "Children playing at heroes. How touching." Another laughed. "Did you really think the Dark Lord wouldn't know that his vision wasn't bait? Phew, Potter. You've made this too easy." Harry's wand was already up the others, forming a loose circle, backs together. Fear turning to adrenaline, turning to the desperate clarity of people with no good options. "Run," Saitama said quietly. "We can't." "Yes, you can. Through that door. Now." "There are too many." The first Death Eater cast. A purple bolt of something that looked like it hurt just from existing screamed through the air. Saitama stepped in front of it. The spell hit his chest and evaporated like steam against glass. The laughter stopped. "What?" the Death Eater said. Not a question, just confusion wrapped in rising concern. Saitama looked at him, looked at the other Death Eaters, looked at the kids behind him who were still not running despite clear instructions. "Fine," he said. "We'll do this the complicated way." The Death Eaters attacked as one wands, raising in perfect synchronization. Curses flew, cutting hexes, crushing charm spells designed to kill quickly and several designed to kill slowly. The air turned electric with magic that wanted nothing more than to unmake flesh. Saitama stood in the center of it like a man standing in rain. The spells hit, burst, fizzled. One managed to singe his cape. He looked down at the scorch mark with mild irritation. "Okay," he said. "That's annoying." He moved, not fast by his standards, just fast enough that the Death Eaters lost track of him between one heartbeat and the next. He appeared beside the nearest one, tapped him on the shoulder, with approximately the same force someone might use to get a cashier's attention, and watched the man spin backward into a shelf hard enough to crack wood. Spheres tumbled, shattered. Prophecies that had waited decades for fulfillment died unheard. "Spread out," someone shouted. "Don't let him." Saitama was already moving again. Tap. Another Death Eater airborne. Tap. A mask cracked the face beneath it, twisted in pain and confusion. Tap, tap, tap. 3 more down, sprawled among broken glass and futures that would never arrive. The students had stopped retreating. They stood frozen, watching something that shouldn't be possible prove that possible was a matter of perspective. A Death Eater tried to run. Saitama appeared in front of him, expression unchanged. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Saitama said. The Death Eater cast directly at his face. The spell ricocheted off, hit a shelf, and sent more orbs cascading down in a waterfall of shattered potential. "See," Saitama said, and flicked the man's forehead. The Death Eater went down like a puppet with cut strings. The remaining attackers regrouped at the far end of the hall, wands up, but hands shaking. This wasn't in their training. This wasn't in their mythology. Dark lords and killing curses and the power of fear, those were things they understood. This was something else entirely. "Retreat," one of them hissed. "Get the Dark Lord, now." They disappeared into the darkness, apparating with sharp cracks that echoed like breaking bones. Silence rushed back in, heavy with dust and disbelief. "That was..." Ron started again. "What was that efficient?" Hermione whispered. Her hands were still shaking. Terrifying, but efficient. Harry just stared at Saitama, the prophecy still clutched in his hand. You could have done that at any time. Yeah. Why didn't you? You said you wanted to know what Voldemort was after. Now you know. Saitama looked around at the destruction, the broken shelves, the Death Eaters groaning in the wreckage. Was it worth it? Before Harry could answer, the air changed. Temperature dropped. Not gradually. All at once, like someone had opened a door to a place where warmth had never existed. The candle flames guttered, turning from blue to something darker, something that looked like light's opposite. A figure materialized at the hall's far end. Tall, impossibly thin, robes that moved without wind, and a face that had traded humanity for something colder, carved from pale flesh and sustained by will alone. Red eyes burned in deep sockets, pupils vertical like a snake's, studying the scene with the focus of a predator that had just found wounded prey. Lord Voldemort had arrived. The students' fear became tangible. It filled the space like a physical presence, choking and absolute. This wasn't a Death Eater. This wasn't a threat they could hex or run from. This was the nightmare their parents whispered about, the darkness the Ministry denied the end of. Everything they'd been taught to believe was safe. Harry took an involuntary step backward. The prophecy nearly slipped from his grip. Voldemort's gaze swept across them, dismissing the students as irrelevant before settling on Saitama. For a long moment, neither moved. The Dark Lord's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to name curiosity calculation, something that might have been concern before pride crushed it. How interesting, Voldemort said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it worse somehow. The anomaly that troubled the Ministry. They said you survived their hexes. I thought it exaggeration. I see now they undersold the problem. Saitama said nothing. No wand. No magical signature. Yet you stand in a room full of my servant's failure. Voldemort's head tilted serpentine. What are you? Tired? Cryptic? How tedious. The red eyes narrowed. The boy will give me the prophecy. You will not interfere. These are simple facts. Accept them, and this ends without further unpleasantness. Or I demonstrate why even death fears me. Voldemort raised his wand, not quickly, not with theatrical flourish, just raised it the way someone might point at something they intended to erase. The spell he cast had no name in any textbook. It was green, the color of the killing curse, but darker, deeper, a green that suggested rot and endings and the final breath before nothing. It crossed the distance between them faster than thought, carrying enough power to stop a heart shred, a soul unmake anything foolish enough to exist in its path. It hit Saitama in the chest. Did absolutely nothing. The spell dissipated like fog against a lighthouse power, draining into air that couldn't hold it. Voldemort's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those eyes. Not fear, not yet. But the first seeds of it, the recognition that the world had just revealed a rule he didn't know existed. Curious, he said, voice still calm, but with new tension beneath it. Shall we try again? He cast 3 more curses in rapid succession. Killing curse, bone-breaking hex, something that looked like concentrated entropy. All 3 hit, all 3 failed. Saitama stood in the aftermath like a man who'd just been sprayed with a garden hose. Are you done? Saitama asked. Voldemort was not done. The next spell made the air itself scream. dark magic compressed into a point that wanted nothing more than to expand violently through whatever occupied the space it desired. Shelves exploded. Stone cracked. The very structure of the room protested the forces being unleashed. Saitama raised one hand, closed it into a fist, stopped the fist 6 inches from Voldemort's face. The shockwave that resulted didn't come from impact. It came from air displacement from force that had to go somewhere and chose backward as its direction. The wave of pressure exploded outward in a cone behind the Dark Lord, perfectly directed, surgically precise. Shelves disintegrated. Prophecy spheres exploded in chains of shattering glass. The blue candles at the end of each row extinguished in sequence like falling dominoes. Death Eaters who'd been creeping closer were thrown backward, masks ripped from their faces by wind that shouldn't exist. The wall at the far end cracked stone, groaning under stress. It was never designed to handle, but Voldemort stood untouched. The shockwave had missed him by inches intentionally. Obviously, a message delivered with more precision than any spell. The Dark Lord stood very still. Around him, the hall settled into new silence. Broken glass tinkled as it finished falling. Somewhere a shelf groaned and collapsed. But Voldemort didn't move, didn't cast, didn't speak. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then something changed in his expression. Not fear, he was too proud, too certain of his immortality to allow fear. But something adjacent to it. Something that lived in the space between control and chaos, between plans and the universe's total indifference to plans. For the first time in decades, Lord Voldemort didn't know what would happen next. The realization was worse than pain. His entire existence was built on the foundation of knowing the outcome, knowing the angles, knowing that death itself could be outmaneuvered through preparation and ruthlessness, and 7 pieces of his soul hidden where destiny couldn't find them. But this man in the yellow suit with the red cape and the completely bald head, this anomaly that magic couldn't read and power couldn't predict, this was a variable that didn't fit in any equation he'd ever written. Horcruxes meant he couldn't truly die, but they didn't mean he could win. And for someone who'd spent his entire life treating survival as a puzzle to be solved through superior intellect, the possibility of an unwinnable scenario was a form of mortality all its own. The seconds stretched. Somewhere in the damaged hall, a Death Eater groaned. Another tried to stand, failed, collapsed back into unconsciousness. Voldemort's wand remained raised. But he didn't cast. Casting meant committing to an outcome he couldn't guarantee, and committing to uncertainty went against every instinct that had kept him alive through wars and transformations and the systematic destruction of his own humanity. "Interesting," he said finally. The word came out quiet, controlled, but underneath it was the sound of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew. He lowered his wand. Not in surrender, in tactical reassessment. "This is not finished, Potter." His eyes never left Saitama. "But it is postponed." He turned. The motion was smooth, dignified, betraying nothing. But Saitama saw what the students couldn't. The fractional hesitation before that turn the way Voldemort's shoulders were slightly too rigid, the micro-adjustment in his stance that suggested he was preparing to dodge something that might or might not come. The Dark Lord walked backward into shadow. Not apparating, not running, just withdrawing with the measured pace of someone who refused to let retreat look like fear. He paused at the threshold where light failed. "We will meet again," Voldemort said, "to Saitama, to the universe." to whatever force had just proven that invincibility was relative. And next time I will understand what you are. Then he was gone. Truly gone. The remaining Death Eaters vanished with him in a series of cracks that sounded like bones breaking. The silence that followed was absolute. Harry stood frozen, prophecy still in hand, unable to process what he'd just witnessed. Hermione's mouth hung open, every rule she'd learned about magic crumbling in real time. Ron looked like he wanted to sit down, but couldn't remember how. Did he just... Hermione started. Run away, Ron finished. Voldemort ran away. He didn't run. Harry's voice was distant. He strategically withdrew. There's a difference. Is there, though? Footsteps echoed from the entrance. New ones, urgent. The cavalry arriving precisely too late to matter. Order of the Phoenix members burst into the hall. Sirius, Lupin, Mad-Eye, others wands drawn ready for battle. They skidded to a stop, taking in the destruction, the unconscious Death Eaters, the students standing shell-shocked in the wreckage. What happened? Sirius demanded. Where's... He saw Saitama, saw the scorch mark on his cape, saw the expression of mild annoyance that suggested recent inconvenience. Oh, Sirius said. You happened. They're fine, Saitama said, nodding toward the students. Voldemort showed up. Oh, didn't like what he found. Left. He left. Mad-Eye's magical eye spun frantically, scanning for threats. Voldemort doesn't leave. He did this time. The prophecy slipped from Harry's fingers. It fell in slow motion, glass meeting stone with a sound like finality. The sphere shattered. Mist poured out, coalescing into a voice that spoke words no one would ever remember, telling a future that had already happened or never would. Then it was gone. Just broken glass and the fading echo of something that might have mattered. Harry stared at the fragments. I broke it. Seems like, Saitama said. That was the whole reason we came, the thing Voldemort wanted, and I just dropped it. Yeah. I don't know if that's better or worse. Probably neither. Saitama looked around at the devastation, the broken futures, the unconscious Death Eaters who'd probably wake up questioning every life choice that led to this moment. Can we leave now? I haven't eaten in 8 hours. Behind them, the tattered curtain in the death chamber whispered something that might have been agreement or warning or just the sound of air moving through fabric. Saitama didn't look back. The students followed him out of the Department of Mysteries through corridors that seemed less ominous now that they weren't sneaking into the Ministry's main hall where emergency lights were already flashing and officials were having what appeared to be synchronized panic attacks. Outside, dawn was breaking over London. Regular dawn. No prophecy, no dark lords. Just light pushing back darkness the way it did every morning, indifferent to everything that had happened in the rooms beneath the city. Saitama looked at the sky. Breakfast sounds good, he said. End of Act 3. Word count 3, 200 words. The Ministry building erupted into controlled chaos by mid-morning. Officials in various states of panic flooded the Department of Mysteries, cataloging damage, interviewing witnesses, and performing the delicate bureaucratic ballet of turning catastrophe into paperwork. The official story took shape, quickly polished by committee and fear in equal measure. There had been an incident. Unauthorized students. Rogue Death Eaters. Property damage. The details grew vaguer the closer anyone got to explaining what had actually happened. Lord Voldemort's name appeared nowhere in the reports. Neither did Saitama's. Containment, the minister said during an emergency meeting Saitama wasn't invited to but heard about anyway. This stays contained. We cannot have the public panicking about forces we don't understand operating inside our most secure facility. Translation. They had no idea what to do about him, so they do what bureaucracies always did with inconvenient truths: ignore them until they went away. Dumbledore sat across from Saitama in a small office the ministry had designated for informal consultations. The headmaster looked tired in a way that went beyond the hour. His half-moon spectacles caught the light as he studied the man who'd just rewritten the rules of magical conflict without meaning to. "They want you gone," Dumbledore said quietly. "Not officially. Not through channels that might create documentation, but gone nonetheless. You've become proof that their power has limits, and powerful people hate nothing more than evidence of their limitations. So I leave, if you wish, though I suspect the method of your departure matters less to them than the fact of it." Dumbledore folded his hands. "The question is where you'll go. The rift that brought you here shows no signs of reopening. I've consulted every expert we have on dimensional magic. None have encouraging news." Saitama had expected this. He'd been pulled into enough weird situations to recognize when a universe wasn't finished with him yet. How long? Uncertain. Weeks, months, possibly longer. The old wizard's eyes held genuine sympathy. "You're welcome to remain at Hogwarts, though I suspect you'll find it rather dull once the students stop treating you like a celebrity." "They're doing that? Oh, yes, you've become something of a legend. The man who made you-know-who retreat. It's very dramatic, very inspiring, very inconvenient for those of us trying to maintain educational standards." Despite everything, Saitama almost smiled. "I'll stay out of the way. I suspect that may be impossible given your nature, but I appreciate the intent." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside the window, London continued its oblivious routine buses, running people walking the ordinary machinery of a world that had no idea how close it had come to something extraordinary. "He'll come back," Dumbledore said eventually. "Voldemort. He's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. He'll study you, plan for you, find ways to work around what you represent." "I didn't defeat him. I just confused him. In some ways, that's worse. Defeat, he understands. Confusion." Dumbledore trailed off, looking thoughtful. Confusion means his worldview requires adjustment. And he's built his entire existence on the certainty that he's accounted for every variable. You're a variable he can't account for. That will haunt him far more than any spell. Saitama thought about the moment in the Hall of Prophecy. The stillness. The calculation behind those red eyes. The decision to withdraw rather than commit to an outcome he couldn't guarantee. "He's afraid of dying," Saitama said. Not a question. Terrified. His entire life has been an elaborate exercise in avoiding death. Horcruxes, dark magic, the systematic destruction of his humanity in exchange for immortality. Dumbledore's voice was soft but sad. He's achieved what he set out to achieve. He cannot truly die. But he's discovered that not dying and living are very different things. Sounds lonely. I imagine it is. The conversation drifted to practical matters. Arrangements, accommodations, the logistics of existing in a world that ran on rules you didn't follow. Eventually, Dumbledore stood, joints creaking with age. "One last thing," the headmaster said at the door. "Harry asked me to thank you. He's not particularly good at expressing gratitude, teenage boys rarely are, but he wanted you to know that you saved their lives last night." "I just stopped some people from hurting them." "Yes, That's generally how life-saving works. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. Try not to be too humble about it. The students are already writing songs. Terrible songs, but enthusiastic ones. He left robes swishing in that particular way that suggested he knew exactly how dramatic it looked and didn't care. Saitama sat alone in the office looking at his hands. Same hands that had destroyed monsters and saved cities and accomplished absolutely nothing that felt meaningful anymore. The same emptiness that had driven him to heroism in the first place still sat in his chest like a stone. But something had shifted. Subtle. Barely noticeable. For 3 seconds in that hall standing between Voldemort and the kids who'd been stupid enough to trust him, Saitama had felt something other than boredom. Not excitement. Not the thrill of a challenge. Just purpose. Brief and quiet, but there. It wasn't much, but it was something. He stood, stretched, left the ministry building through front doors that no longer seemed interested in stopping him. Outside London, sprawled in every direction, huge, complicated, completely indifferent to dimensional refugees and dark lords and the small human dramas that played out in the spaces between the extraordinary. Somewhere in the distance, Hogwarts waited. A castle full of kids learning magic and fighting wars and making exactly the kind of mistakes that youth specialized in. Saitama started walking. Not toward anything specific, not with any particular plan. Just walking because standing still had never solved anything, and probably wasn't going to start now. Behind him in rooms he'd never see the ministry began the slow work of forgetting he existed. Officials filed reports that omitted key details. Witnesses were encouraged to remember selectively. The machine of bureaucratic denial ground forward with practiced efficiency. And deep in the shadows beyond London, in a place where light went to die and stayed dead, Lord Voldemort stood before a mirror that showed him nothing. Not because the mirror was broken. Because for the first time in decades, he genuinely didn't know what he was looking at when he looked at himself. The world had revealed a crack in his certainty. And through that crack, something he'd spent his entire life running from had started to seep in. Not death. Something worse. Doubt. He turned from the mirror, began planning, started calculating. Did what he'd always done when faced with obstacles, broke them down into components he could control. But in the back of his mind, behind the strategy and the rage and the absolute refusal to accept limits, a small voice whispered a truth he couldn't silence. Some things couldn't be controlled. Some forces couldn't be predicted. And some bald men in capes just wanted groceries. The world kept turning. Prophecies kept breaking. Heroes kept being heroic in ways that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. And somewhere between all of it in the margins, where chaos met routine, Saitama found a quiet place to exist until the universe decided he could go home. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't dramatic. It was just life. And for once, that was almost enough. End. Word count, 1. 200 words. Total story, word count, 9, 650 words. Act 0, 950 words. Act 1, 450 words. Acts 2, 850 word. Acts 3, 200 words. Epilogue 1, 200 word. Saitama's presence in the wizarding world does not rewrite its history so much as quietly destabilize its assumptions. He does not challenge magic with stronger magic, nor darkness with a brighter prophecy. Instead, he exposes an uncomfortable truth, that power when absolute becomes mundane, and that fear survives only where belief in control persists. For the ministry, Saitama is a problem without a category. He cannot be regulated, explained, or leveraged, and that alone is terrifying. For Hogwarts, he becomes an unintended lesson not in strength, but in composure. Students learn that survival is not only about spells cast faster or louder, but about standing steady when panic demands collapse. Even Voldemort is changed by the encounter. For the first time, he faces something that does not fear death, does not negotiate with it, and does not care to dominate it. Against such indifference, his obsession with immortality is laid bare as fragile and desperate. When Saitama eventually leaves the world, remains dangerous, but it is no longer the same. A crack has formed in the myth of destiny itself. And through it, the wizarding world glimpses a future where choice matters more than prophecy and calm can be more powerful than fear. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.